Shemai LQ. It is such an honour to be here in London, South Bank, and talk to you about your poetry and your craft and your writing journey.
Thank you so much. It's just a great pleasure to meet you as well, Taz, and be outdoors here on a lovely day. Yeah.
So I'll start by asking, how did poetry begin for you? And can you remember the very first poem you wrote?
Oh, this is such an interesting question because I think I've always been interested in words, and I wrote little stories when I was young, and I probably didn't think about the distinction between poetry and prose, And then I think in my teenage years, when you go through that formal education, I began to think, some forms maybe suit me more than others. And then, like many women perhaps, I came across Sylvia Plath and I thought, interesting, poetry can do something. I can do something with poetry that's different from what I can do with prose. So I've been writing poetry since my teenage years. I've no idea how long I've been reading poetry because it's probably started earlier than that. And I cannot think what my first poem is. I've had this long running obsession with water, and I have a feeling that my first poem probably was about water. Certainly I looked back through my little notes of where I've been published, and my first publication was a poem called Becalmed. So it must have been about water when I was a student. So
yes.
Yeah, that's
Great. Those stunning use of inventive forms in your poetry. I wanted to know how you navigate shapes and forms in what you want to say.
I find my poems through the process of writing. I'm not a poet that thinks I'm going to write a sestina and then I write a sestina. I'm not one of those sort of poets. So I find the process of drafting leads me to the form that I think the poem needs to be in. And those forms are varied because I guess all poems are varied, and I think of every single one as a unique living thing in itself. I guess that's how I think of my poems when I've written them and they've come into their own. And I guess the other thing to say is I'm very visual, so I think about the shape of my poems on the page very much. I'm very influenced by visual poetry, by concrete poetry, by the Chinese classical poetry that I saw growing up, that people have on tablets in front of their doors and in calligraphy and art. So those things really come into play in terms of the shape and the form on the page. Those really are part of how I come to it.
And has this changed, if I may ask, over the process of your writing journey, in terms of have the shapes and forms maybe taken shape from how and when you first started writing to today?
I guess with everybody, when you find your voice, you move away from the stanzas on the page. You move away from the block on the page. So I think as I found my voice, I thought much more about those things, and then I thought about how I would break at it. And I think that's partly because of coming to find my voice was about really leaning into being somebody who's of mixed heritage, who's between places, between cultures. I'm really interested in the edges of things, the margins. I'm really interested in the blur of things. So the sort of the stanza, the regular metrical form, I came to that understanding that it just really wasn't that wasn't who I was. That wasn't the gift I brought to the dialogue of poetry. That's for others, and for me, where my my interest and my passion was in the unbalancing,
Yes.
the white space, pushing things to the edges, finding a space that's broken but can yet be whole. So I think, in terms of kind of form, that's where really my journey's gone on. As I've performed more, I've thought more about sonic patterning more intentionally. So if I master write a poem specifically for performance, then that's something I foreground. So yeah, I mean that's how things have changed as I've been more into my practice and done more and met more people and
Yes.
had more conversations that I wanted to be in. So I'm going to read the first poem in my collection. Scythianism. A woman walks into a city of tall lights, concrete, cast shadows. A woman walks into a city of tarmac, cars careen, street and lamp are intimate. We could talk of crowds, of congestion. A woman walks into a city of people, uprooted, roadside tatters. A woman walks into a city, shattered. She falls to her knees. How they bear the weight, a bone grip on the earth, the distances. There's a forest, high rise flecks the horizon. There's a field, wind-blown lights. Not of lawn or of overgrown grass. There's an allotment, torn weeds, split seeds, far from windows. There's one tree, blossom, nubs of new. Witness, every branch is a script. Leaves spell slivers of hearts.
How did your debut pamphlet, The Unquiet, published by Off-Road Road Books in 2019, come about?
Isn't it funny? Time goes past, and it's a thing that's in the world, and it's hard to remember the beginning of it. 2017, 2018, I was really fortunate to go onto a development program hosted by Lewis Buxton and Harriet Quillman, the Toast program. I met a lot of amazing poets at that time, people who were sort of on a similar place in the journey. And I think poetry had really changed. I think 10 years before that, I didn't think I had a voice that anybody would want to hear.
Right.
And I think British poetry at that point had suddenly opened up in terms of diversity. And not only did I hear voices like mine or voices that were different from the voices I'd heard before, but I wanted to enter into that conversation. So, a combination of having been on that development program, the time it was in that journey. I went to an Avon course and I wrote Learning to be Mixy, and that poem, all the other poems in The Unquiet coalesced around that. I wanted to say something about that time, about my experience of migration, and engage in the conversation that other multilingual poets were having at that time about registers, languages, the ones we could own, the ones we could take into the public domain, what gave us the right to speak and where we were being silenced. So all of those things kind of came at the time. I'd met Martha Spracklen, very fortunately, kind of at an event And then I saw that Oxford Road did a call, and I just sent them my manuscript on spec. So yeah, that's how it all happened, I think. 2019 is a while ago.
It is. Looking back, yes, it does seem like absolutely ages ago.
Yeah, there's something about the blur of the pre-COVID and since COVID.
Yes.
Really, the linearity of time is very broken
Yes.
for me. My next poem uses Teochew, which is my home Chinese dialect. I'm going to use a phrase that means I want to tell you something. There's something I want to talk to you about. I think the poem speaks to experiences of education and migration. Swallow. Grammars gather on power lines. Verbs twitter in the Mangafira. I roost in humid shade, overeating from the dictionary. Nouns sticky as langsat, a kilo of adjuncts, a catty of adverbs. Well, I got that jet dawe. Orotund, ubiety, opaque, smeasling, desuetude, spoilage. Well, I got that jet dawe. Minatory, plangent, deliquesce, lutelant, sportive, grackle. The words I swallow become feathers poking through my skin. I am fledging for the migration. A window opens, a window yawns, a line of lipstick, palms reddening the horizon. I'm at the stage where I edit my poems as I'm reading, change them every time.
My co-editor at Mod Drawn magazine, Lynn Edwards, had already spoken to you about your beautiful evocative poem, Amplexus. I wanted to know more about the essential linguistic choices you make in this poem, and in other poems that combine many existences, realities, and wordplay.
So Amplexus specifically comes out of a kind of a thing that I wanted to do for a really long time, which was to write a sex poem, but not a. I wanted it to be about that experience, that positionality, about what a moment of connection is. I wanted it to be kind of part of that porousness that I think comes in that moment. So that's kind of what kind of engendered Amplexus. In terms of the sort of linguistic choices, I'm not, well, I probably am as well a heart and hand poet, because I think we probably all are. But I think over time I've been really passionate about how poetry is about the heart. You know, it doesn't live unless it comes through your heart. It doesn't live for me unless it comes through the body. So I'm making linguistic choices now that I think are very much about embodiment, are about positionality. I'm thinking a lot about how close the language is to the subjects in the poem, how close they are together, how close I am to my reader, if that makes sense. I'm kind of leaning. Amplexus for me is a poem that's about play. I wanted to be really playful with it. I like words that shift their meaning through repetition. I like words that kind of, you know, when you fall off the end of the line into another line, it's slightly not what you thought it would be. So that it was kind of moving. I think that's, I'm kind of looking for that in my kind of poetic choices now. Yeah, I think. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does, yes, it answers it in many ways, yeah. Thank you. Sean Hewitt has described your poetry as inventive and iridescent, navigating ecology, migration and identity. I wanted to know more about the botanical and ecological detail that pepper your collection, More Than Weeds, published by Nine Arches Press.
I've been really interested for a long time in the language that people use about plant and animal species, and also with that how it links into the language that people use about people. So, we talk about migrant animals and plant species in the same way as we talk about migrant people, but I think with plant and animal species to a greater extent than people, because people have agency about moving. To some extent, not always, but to some extent, I was just really interested in that. So a lot of the poems kind of came out of that, wanting to give the plants and animals a voice and to recognize that their being here is a legacy of colonialism. So a lot of the poems are about species that have been brought from elsewhere, that have naturalized here, done very well, who were once, extremely beloved, rare, exotic, and are now, considered, unwanted, too abundant, doing too well. All the language that we use about people and about migrant labor in the same way. So. That really drove the Unquiet. In terms of the kind of More Than Weeds narrative, and I kind of wanted. I had been working for a while, kind of in the green space movement as well, and horticulture, just sort of as kind of a volunteer, and I was really struck by how green spaces, which should be open to us all, are not. And often that's driven by class and it's about power as well. So a lot of those themes kind of weave in through More Than Weeds. And botany is a colonial science. It comes out of that desire to go to another place, find a resource and exploit it. And we have these pretty gardens and we forget that these pretty gardens are often pretty because we've taken something from somewhere else and exploited it. And that's not always been great for, other things. It's not been great, it's not always great for the plant that comes here or the animal. Those things were kind of came to the project of More Than Weeds. And I think the latter half of that book, I was writing it, through COVID. And we might probably remember that narrative of, parks and how you could go for a walk and who could go into a park, whose children, is it okay to play?
Yes. Whose
children can have a picnic? Can you sit on the grass or can you not? All of that was kind of in the background of this book. So the title of this next poem is The District in the State I Grew up in. It's also the name of a river, and it's also where my father ran a field study station when I was a child. Gomba. Wet greeted us everywhere, its green mossiness, earthy and insinuating, between flip-flop and feet. Woody drips from the dark canopy, squelching leaf litter. It licked us along the dark corridor, skidding from concrete kitchen onto long veranda and down the steep slope to that sudden sunlit padang and beyond, flowing glints, clean water, swift, and there she was. Sungai, kakak, capricious sister, she sprayed us with sweet stream scent, skirted soft sandstone, rocks slippery, shoulders undercutting earth banks. Her spirits altered after the rains. Waking us, she grumbled gravel, grumpy at being rust-rushed, bearing the load of overlogging, heavy sediment from up-valley deforestation. Our old white Ford was a rhino, turning reluctantly out of the gate. Its lurch lumber expelled me from Forest Home to other study stations. Tear blind, feeling sick, evicted, I looked back to the red-roofed refuge of road-scarred lorrymen, its altar offering oranges and incense, the giant banyan with roots upwards, branches hunched over, weeping.
You've already mentioned the space opening up to poets from different identities and backgrounds, and presently there is an array of brilliant poetic voices emanating from or cultivating a dual Southeast Asian heritage, and each distinctive in their poetry. You've been featured in the Eddie Tay and Jennifer Wong edited anthology State of Play, which featured a range of voices. I wanted to know more about this poetic diaspora and the navigation of cultural diversity that makes this poetry resonate so well with contemporary poetry audiences.
Wow, that's such a big question, because Southeast Asia is, I think, like all areas of the world, just really, really different. I think we talk about areas of the world as a simple thing, and I think that's probably a legacy of colonialism as well. I think technology has blurred a lot of boundaries. We've suddenly been able to connect across large amounts of space that we never could do before. The openness to different voices that there has been in the UK opened that door. I think COVID and Brexit and the kind of the increased overt racism has really led us to go, okay, we're going to hold our identity because we're already having our identity held to us. We're going to own it. And we're going to find other people who have glorious differences, but also commonalities with us. And across Southeast Asia, there's so much difference, but I think at the same time, so much commonality. And I think that's where a lot of this work has come from. Jennifer Wong curated, she ran a kind of festival, an online festival during 2020, I think, during COVID, which is now the Red Bean Poetry Series. And so she's been very instrumental in linking more of the East Asian experience and into kind of the UK. And then obviously we've had the movement, the kind of migration that's been coming out of Hong Kong for political reasons there. Which has kind of added more into the mix, and I think that's where we hear voices like Eric Gipp's voice, but lots more others, and I think there are communities that perhaps were not so much heard, but have now, because of this time that we're in, have kind of have become more prominent, and we have found kind of more commonality together, and that's kind of a great richness, and I think it's hugely exciting that it's resonating with readers. I think writers I know who write for young people talk often about, are we talking about our writing being a window or a mirror? I think poetry has moved away from just being a mirror to being a window, and we are now open to both and many, and looking out and through, and stepping out and through apertures to be with other people. So I think it's an exciting time, and I hope we will continue to do all of these things together. I think there's a huge richness and difference, and I'm really glad that poetry in English and in all the Englishes, has this common forum that we're coming together on, because technology enables us to do so.
Yes, yeah. If I may ask a follow-up question, being that I think your own voice is very, very distinctive, within this, within this group of poets. In that, I think you're almost unique in the way you weave in concerns about climate change, ecology, and how you equate that to migration in general, and let's say movement of people. And I wonder if this is something that you've consciously thought about, this distinction, or you always, this was always part of kind of your thought process to write poetry, concerning ecology and migration.
I think it's always been there. I think it's a false distinction, people and the environment. I guess because I come from a culture, with a very firm Buddhist tint, so every life is an equal soul, and I wondered, what difference is there between us and the other animals? What difference is there between us, our voices and their voices? Is the world we live in now like this because we've gone, and to take that Judeo-Christian kind of view, the world was made for us to exploit? Is that the right thing? And I'm interested in the other voices, in the voices of the plants and animals, even though I don't speak whatever their language is, because we're all living in a world together.
Yes.
I think because we don't think plants and animals are our kin, we don't think the soil is part of us.
Yes.
We don't think the air and the water is part of us. That allows us to do these awful things that we're doing. And I wanted, it's my personal belief, and I wanted it to be part of how I spoke in the world. And I think my poetry is very much about the conversation in the world. And so I want in my poems, those the plants that we don't think have voices, to have voices, and to know that they are, as important, that there are love stories that they share, they have families, and societies of their own. It's just that we don't acknowledge them. I wanted that to be part of the conversation.
Thank you. Who are your poetry inspirations from the past and present generation of poets?
That is so difficult a question. Just so many people. I read poetry not like a list. I read poetry like a field that I'm running into, and I'm rolling in it. This is how I read poetry. So everything I've read is an influence. I mentioned Sylvia Plath, of the concrete poets. The Scottish poet Edward Morgan has been a really strong influence. I've been thinking a lot recently about Gerald Manley Hopkins, you know, his
Yes,
kind of
yes.
interest in the natural world, his rhythms, his kind of decentering. I'm reading a lot of Chinese classical poetry at the moment, so I'm interested in who's speaking, where's the voice, how close are we?
Yes.
Yeah, all of those things. I mean, in contemporary poetry, gosh, I'm just like, if only I could read all the time. I just don't. I've just read Karen Downs Barton's Minx, which I loved. You know that she moves between her conventional English and Romany. She works to disrupt form, what is allowed, what isn't. You know, there's so much in her work that's just kind of disruptive. I've just read Tom Sastri's, I think Life
Yes.
Expectancy Begins to Fall,
Yes.
which just speaks so beautifully to what might happen if we don't engage with the world in a different way than we are.
Yes.
Gosh, I can't think. Alice Tellier, Romulan Auntie, Sean Wycong, all these people were like in my head today. Peter MacKay, the Scottish macker. I find his work, you know, his poems in Gaelic and his poems in English really inspirational, and I'm really inspired because he's talked about feeling like he's not a clean speaker. So I found that really, really inspiring. I've had so many teachers. Yeah, I feel like I could go on and on and on. I feel like I've forgotten somebody,
Yes.
like I should have said somebody's name. It's so hard.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but you mentioned classical Chinese poetry. I wondered if you'd care to name perhaps a few of those poets, so you know we can.
Gosh. I mean, there are the ones that are frequently translated into English, you know, Li Bai, Tu Fu. You know, those are the poets that people are translating often. I've been very blessed. I'm have somebody who's helping me learn, and she's been introducing me to all these poets I've never heard of, which makes me think about all these poets that don't cross the divide of translation, and that you know, there are so many poets we need to move across into other languages to learn. And being multilingual is something that's normal in the rest of the world, not so normal in the UK perhaps,
Yes.
but in a lot of places being multilingual is really normal, and I think we should embrace that opportunity to, just learn a little bit more, you know, move across.
Absolutely.
If I read like a 12-year-old, that is fine too, you know, because we were all 12 once.
Yes.
And, maybe I'm always 12 when I read some work, I don't know. You know, I think that's fine. I think poetry, is fine on so many levels, and it should be. We should be excited about that. Open Gardens, and I stole the title from Corner McPhee. My people pass, abandoned wastelands, stop to dig and stake, sift soil into clean beds. My people use earth-splattered tools, a day at a time. Plants wild around ruins. And my people overlook catmint and cardoons, the rough corners riotous with nettles and snails. My people tolerate fat hen and pig thistle. Hands propagate, tongues enjoy. My people thrive. Deadhead and pot,
I don't even know what I wrote.
green
The French guy.
into ordered clumps. My people begin to root out. A brace of colours. Among the casualties, bearded iris, red phlox. My people unfold dark, dirt, dreams, of tendriling, winged drifts of pollen, cultivars bearing bright heads. When my people rise, how easy it becomes to fence what grew, to put closed signs on the gates.
What are you working on at present in terms of writing?
So I'm working on what I hope will be my next collection. I don't know what it's like for people who when they come to their next collection, but it's about so many things and I'm not really sure what to say about it. So it's about frogs, because frogs are amazing.
Yes.
Frogs are cool. Frogs are cute. I love frogs. So it's about frogs. It's about skin, because skin is porous. It's our largest breathing organism, our organ rather, and it's the first thing that comes into contact with the environment. What else am I writing about? It's about wet stuff.
Yes.
So it's going to be a wet collection, I think. You know, I always feel very challenged when I'm asked this question. I know lots of people who write fiction and for young people, you know, and I meet them and they go, I'm writing a book, it's about a bunny, it goes to the moon and it meets new friends, and I'm like, and then I give my poet's answer about what I'm writing about and they look at me like, interesting. But it's exciting to meet new people.
Yes.
And share their well-beings.
And again, I'm absolutely fascinated by this idea of frogs and an entire collection that is about the amphibians, maybe, and the wetness you referred to. I just find your poetry to be so uniquely different, as I have said, that I'm eagerly anticipating this second collection.
Well, thank you. I'm very grateful that other people might be as excited about frogs as I am. So, yeah.
Well, diolch yn fawr, LQ. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Well, thank you for talking to me.